Well, hopefully most of you got to see Dr. Lindsay Zano's awesome keynote lecture, and she was talking about the middle of the Cretaceous period. And so I want to take you back to the very beginning of the age of dinosaurs. Just as a reminder, here we have part of the geologic timescale, and the age of dinosaurs typically we talk about as being the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, but we should really include the last 65 million years as well. As Lindsay mentioned, birds are very diverse with nearly 10,000 species alive today, so the age of dinosaurs is still very much in full force. And I want to specifically focus in on the Triassic period, which is between about 250 and 201 million years ago, and divided into three separate subzones. And we'll particularly be focusing on the late Triassic period, which paradoxically actually takes up most of the Triassic, about the last 35 million years of the Triassic. That time period really witnesses the very first dinosaurs. We see about 245 million years ago the first clear ancestors of dinosaurs, and then the very first dinosaurs show up in Argentina at about 230 million years ago. Here in North America, in the western US specifically, our record of dinosaurs starts a little bit later at about 225 million years ago, going on for really the rest of the Mesozoic era. Our Earth looked very, very different at this time. We had all the continents together in one supercontinent, and it was a very different place. There were no polar ice caps. This is what we call a greenhouse or a hothouse world with atmospheric carbon dioxide levels 2 to 3 times what they are today, and a generally much warmer time. In the interior of the continents, it would have reached up to, easily had 6 months where it was 40 degrees Celsius, so we're talking about around 100 degrees Fahrenheit for months on end. So not always a nice place to live. Just to orient you, here are today's modern continents. You'll notice that Europe is sort of an island archipelago up top here. Here's North America, much closer to the equator than it is today. The southern continents and India is not attached to Asia. In fact, it's much further south. And during the Mesozoic era, it broke away and drifted northward till it slammed into the southern edge of Asia about 60 to 50 million years ago. And Antarctica and Australia are down here as well. And here we are in Utah, about 10 to 15 degrees latitude, so not that far away from the equator. Now, if we take a snapshot of some of these ecosystems during the very beginning of the age of dinosaurs, we're going to see all sorts of wonderful, fantastic beasts that are very weird-looking reptiles and amphibians and fish and all sorts of weird creatures. But what's really strange is that if you look at these, some of them might look dinosaur-like, some might look totally different, but we only have very, very few dinosaurs around at the very beginning of the age of dinosaurs. Of all these reptiles and other creatures that you see here, only these 2 little meat-eating dinosaurs, one of which is being eaten itself, are actually the dinosaurs. We have crocodile relatives, we have mammal relatives with Pulsarius over here, and that's one of the things I'm really interested in is how can we tell something about this transition? What's going on here, and why did dinosaurs become so successful when we had all these other weird and wonderful creatures, many of which died out at the end of the Triassic period? And can we sort of figure out what was going on and why dinosaurs were so small and sort of food for other animals during the late Triassic period? This is also a time where we really see the origin of modern ecosystems. So not only do we have the first relatives of birds in dinosaurs, but we get the first mammals, the first close relatives of crocodiles, the first turtles, and the first lizards. So if you want to understand where our animals that we see on land today come from, you have to go back to the Triassic period to look at their origins. So just a quick review, there are 3 major groups of dinosaurs that we're dealing with and that we'll talk about today. And you've already heard about them with Lindsay's talk, but also in many of the other talks today. We have the plant-eating ornithischian dinosaurs that evolved into the horned dinosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, the armored dinosaurs, animals like that. We have the long-necked sauropodomorphs, which were also plant eaters, and they evolved into these giant multi-ton animals with really long necks and tails that are literally the largest creatures to ever walk the earth. And finally, we have the theropod dinosaurs. These are the meat-eating dinosaurs that eventually gave rise to birds. So what does the beginning of the age of dinosaurs look like in the western US? So here's a map of the Four Corners region, and all the black areas you see are Triassic sedimentary rocks where we could potentially find dinosaurs and their ancestors. And I've also put up the paleogeographic map just to keep you oriented as to where we're talking about. And these are the paleolatitudes. So back in the Triassic, northern Arizona was at about 10 degrees, and Salt Lake City was just above about 15 degrees north, and we're at about 35, 38 today, something like that. We have a lot of rocks from this time period, but most of the data that we have related to the origin of dinosaurs comes from Arizona and New Mexico, and particularly this place called Ghost Ranch and Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. And there, many, many years, nearly 100 years of study, has found that we do find dinosaur bones and bones of their close relatives, but it's somewhat restricted in terms of the types of dinosaurs we're finding. So we get small meat-eating dinosaurs like Tawa here from Ghost Ranch, Coelophysis, Chindisaurus, and then some close dinosaur relatives that didn't make it out of the Triassic that aren't quite dinosaurs but look sort of similar. But there aren't any plant-eating dinosaurs, which is really strange. So if we sort of look at these three major groups of dinosaurs, the ornithischians, the sauropodomorphs, and the theropods, in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, we don't have any of the plant-eating ornithischian dinosaurs. We don't have any of the plant-eating long-necked sauropodomorphs. And we do have theropods, the meat-eating dinosaurs, but they're just a few species of small ones. Nothing as big as, say, Allosaurus or Dilophosaurus yet. And when we look at all the fossils that we found, less than 10% of the bones that we found belong to dinosaurs. So they're not very common compared to some of these other really big reptiles that we see, like the crocodile-like phytosaurs or the armored aedosaurs that are more closely related to crocodiles. And so dinosaurs are not really dominating their ecosystems like they do later in the Mesozoic. So if you took a picture back then, this is what it might look like with lots of different reptiles, but the only dinosaur in this picture here is Coelophysis running for its life in the background, with lots of other bigger reptiles that are not dinosaurs. And I'll come back to these forest fires towards the end of my talk, why they're there. But as I mentioned, almost all these data are from southern part of the Colorado Plateau, so from Petrified Forest, Ghost Ranch, and places like that. You can see there's a lot of black areas in southern Utah particularly. So what about Utah? What does it have to contribute to that? It's much further north, so maybe we should expect to see different things there. So for the rest of the talk, I want to take you to a couple of places where we've been working here at the Natural History Museum, as well as in collaboration with other institutions. So in collaboration with Dan Shurey at Dinosaur National Monument, we've been working up there. And then in collaboration with the St. George Dinosaur Track Site Museum and Andrew Milner there, we've been working in these areas, Lisbon Valley and Indian Creek in southeastern Utah. And Indian Creek is part of the new Bears Ears National Monument. So let's first go to Dinosaur National Monument in northeastern Utah. This is a map of the monument, and the best exposures from the beginning of the age of dinosaurs are in the western part of the monument, so not far from the big quarry wall that you can go see with all those wonderful bones in the rock from the Morrison. So those are 75 million years later in time. We're talking about rocks that are about 210 to 215 million years old. This is what the exposures look like. The rocks are tilted on edge, and so beneath the Chinle Formation, which is the rocks from the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, we have the early Triassic Moenkopi, and above we have the Nugget Sandstone. And Brooks Britt, who's next, is going to talk to you about some really exciting discoveries from the Nugget Sandstone that document the Triassic-Jurassic transition. But all these rocks in the middle that are white and red and orange, those are the ones that really record some of the first dinosaurs here in Utah. And specifically, it's these upper sandstones and siltstones that are sort of reddish orange that produce the best fossils. Now, unfortunately in this area, we don't find a lot of bones, and the best bones are pretty paltry. They're individual armor plates and teeth and maybe a few fish scales on the left there, but nothing really exciting. And in addition, none of these bones are from dinosaurs. We've got armor plates from the crocodile-like phytosaurs, but we don't have any dinosaur bones. Fortunately, though, we have lots and lots of trace fossils, both from invertebrate animals as well as vertebrate animals. And this is material that Martin Lockley first started describing in the late 1980s from this area, and we've been doing a comprehensive survey and found quite a few additional localities as well. And these sort of thin layers of orange sandstone produce a whole abundance of different trace fossils, including footprints. So we've got things like small reptile footprints. These are just less than an inch wide, so you can hopefully see here outlined these small reptiles. And these are being made by animals that are probably no longer than about this long. And they're not dinosaurs, they're other types of reptiles. We find lots of footprints made by aedosaurs, these armored herbivores. And here are some footprints. This has both a foot and a hand here, right here. And this is a footprint in situ that we did a digital model of. So these armored crocodile relatives called aedosaurs. Again, not dinosaurs. We do find some dinosaur footprints, but we don't find a lot of them, and they're really small. So you can see 5 centimeters is a scale bar, so that's only about this long. And these are footprints here of these small meat-eating dinosaurs. And they are less than, each footprint is a lot less than a foot long. So these are very small meat-eating dinosaurs, nothing big. And we don't see any evidence of footprints from plant-eating dinosaurs. There's a really great track site that Martin first described from the very top of the Chinle Formation, and here's the map that he published with all these different tracks here. And almost all the footprints belong to aedosaurs. There are a few footprints from small dinosaurs, and then this unusual footprint called Evozoum that is probably either an early dinosaur or an early dinosaur relative, but it's hard to tell. And again, though, no big dinosaurs, no plant eaters. So if we sort of summarize what we're seeing here, we have, just like we saw in Arizona and New Mexico, no ornithischian dinosaurs, no sauropodomorphs, so none of the plant-eating dinosaurs, and we only have small meat-eating dinosaurs. And they're very, very rare. They're only found as footprints. They're not dominating the landscape. So how about these places further south, Lisbon Valley and Indian Creek, just east of Canyonlands National Park? So this is what the exposures look like in some of the areas. We have Permian rocks below, so this is long before, about 75 to 100 million years before the age of dinosaurs. And then we have the Wingate Sandstone, which is similar to the Nugget Sandstone in Dinosaur National Monument that documents this end-Triassic transition. And all the rocks in between, these gray and orangish red rocks, are the Chinle Formation that we've been studying with Andrew Milner and his team from the Dinosaur Track Site Museum in St. George. Here, in contrast to Dinosaur National Monument, we find lots and lots of bones, and of a lot of different animals. We have complete skeletons from fish. We have these crocodile-like phytosaurs. We've got many skulls and all sorts of bones and teeth from them. We even find skulls of early crocodiles when they were small, fleet-footed predators. Animals like this, but no bones from a single dinosaur. There's no dinosaur bones whatsoever. We do find tracks too, which is really cool. So we've got lots and lots of tracks from both Lisbon Valley and Indian Creek. And again, we have a variety of different reptiles. So here's a footprint from a phytosaur, and then we have these small reptile footprints. You can see my finger down here for scale. But these aren't dinosaurs. These are not being made by dinosaurs. There are dinosaur footprints, but like we saw at Dinosaur National Monument, those dinosaur footprints are small. That lens cap is only about that big around. So these are very small meat-eating dinosaurs, no evidence of plant-eating dinosaurs. And so this is fitting this same pattern, right? We know that dinosaurs were around, but they weren't very abundant, and they weren't leaving their bones around very often, and they're all small meat eaters. So similar pattern to what we see. So this is telling us a consistent story, right? We're not just seeing at one site or a couple sites the same pattern. Across the western US, we're seeing this pattern of only evidence of small meat-eating dinosaurs and no evidence of the two groups of plant-eating dinosaurs. And this is true at other sites that have been studied by other researchers. This is from near Moab, a variety of different tracks, and all these black three-toed tracks, those are small meat-eating dinosaur footprints, and they're all this size or smaller. So they don't get very big, and that's about the only dinosaur footprints we see. But it's in contrast to when you get to the beginning of the Jurassic period here in Utah, whether it's in St. George or by Moab. Throughout Utah, we all of a sudden see a big change in the tracks that we see. So, work by Martin and his group have found footprints of long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs, the sauropodomorphs, like you see here. And all of a sudden, we start to see really big meat-eating dinosaurs that were probably made by something like Dilophosaurus, so animals like this. And I didn't show them, but we also have footprints now showing up of the plant-eating ornithischian dinosaurs as well. So immediately after the Triassic, we start to see all three dinosaur groups, and we get a lot greater variance in size. So there's both small dinosaurs and big dinosaurs, and we start to find their bones as well. So why is this? I mean, what's going on? Because what was it about the Triassic that meant we only have these small meat-eating dinosaurs here? We know the other two groups were present in other places. And why is it that they suddenly show up then at the beginning of the Jurassic period? Well, we think it has something to do with climate. So this is another map of what the Triassic world looked like. And based on both data from the Triassic, but also comparing to the present, you get humid and hot regions right around the equator, but then in the low latitudes, it's hot and dry. And it's not until you get about 30 degrees north and south that you start to get more humid conditions again. And we think this is what's driving this pattern, because all the places that are in the low latitudes in the dry belts, we only find rare small meat-eating dinosaurs. And we get all the plant-eating dinosaurs preserved at the higher latitudes where it was more humid. And you can imagine that might make sense, because if it's humid, you get a lot more plants. And so there's a lot more predictable food for these large plant-eating dinosaurs to eat. Whereas if you're a small carnivorous dinosaur, you can pretty much eat anything that you'll fit in your mouth. But as soon as you get to becoming a big meat-eating dinosaur, then you have lots of food that you're dependent on. So we think that climate is driving what animals are being found. We don't yet have good data from right around the equator or the southern part of the arid regions, and so that's something that we'd really like to fill in. And this is supported by a bunch of different data that we've gotten from places like New Mexico and in Utah, where we see that the plants that are there are adapted towards dry conditions. We have really extensive evidence of forest fires, and we see that the health of the ecosystem is fluctuating continually. So it's a very unstable time. And if you're a plant eater dependent on a particular group of plants, this is not a good time, because it might be there or might not. And so all the geologic evidence is supporting the idea that it was an unstable, fairly seasonally dry and hot area in Western North America. And these fast-growing plant-eating dinosaurs really couldn't deal with it, whereas the slower-growing meat eaters of other reptiles and the small meat-eating dinosaurs could still eke out an existence. And so it's really cool, because Utah helps fill out this story of understanding dinosaur origins and showing that it's not just that all dinosaur groups showed up immediately across the globe, and that climate is having a huge impact in when they appear in different places. As I think might be talked about in some other lectures, at the end of the Triassic, we finally have we have this big mass extinction event. And that sort of resets everything and may allow these other plant-eating dinosaurs to come in. Also, it got a little more humid during the Jurassic, and that may have helped out those plant-eating dinosaurs. So hopefully, that's not the dinosaur roar. Hopefully gives you a sense of why we think that we just have these piddling little small meat-eating dinosaurs among this host of great diversity of reptiles and amphibians during the late Triassic, and that climate as well as mass extinction events are playing a huge role in why dinosaurs became such a successful group. It wasn't necessarily that they were inherently better than any other group, but you have to place them within that context of what's going on. And with that, I'd like to thank funding agencies and especially our museum volunteers both here and at St. George for fieldwork and preparation, and my collaborators as well. Thank you so much. So I have time to take a couple of questions. So the question was, of the three major groups of dinosaurs, what's the order in which they appear? Well, we know that they all share a common ancestor, so that they sort of, the two major branches appeared at the same time just because they had to split at some point. But all three major groups first show up at basically the same time, 230 million years ago in Argentina. That doesn't mean that's when they first evolved. It just means when we first found them. And it's very likely they evolved maybe 3 or 4 or 5 million years before that. Whether they evolved in the southern continents or not, it's hard to say. That's where we find the earliest ones, but it's more an issue of we don't have good rocks of that age here in North America. So does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. So the question was, does the breakup of Pangaea over the age of dinosaurs contribute to climate change? And it almost certainly did, because once you start having all these additional oceans that break up the continents, then it changes climate patterns and atmospheric patterns. But that was a very gradual process, and so it probably wasn't until the late Jurassic that you had substantial enough sea, like the Atlantic Ocean was opened up enough to really start to have a major effect. But people have proposed that some of the reasons that it gets a little more humid in the Jurassic is that just the tiny slit of opening up, beginning of opening the Atlantic had an effect. So it very well could have. Yeah, that's something I didn't really get into a whole lot. The question is, when did dinosaurs start getting big? And it depends on where you're talking about. In Europe and South America, at the higher latitudes, we have big sauropodomorphs, these big long-necked plant eaters. Already, 1 to 2 to 3 ton animals, about 215 million years ago. And so that's the same time as these rocks I was talking about here in Utah when we were just getting these small meat eaters. So other places they got big early, but they didn't get big here in North America until the Jurassic period. All right. So I can take additional questions outside afterwards. Thanks so much, and we'll move on to the next speaker.